Marcus Cole had no business being at the Valkyrie Galactic auction, and he knew it the moment he walked through the towering crystal doors. The auction house floated in orbit around a dying star, and it catered to species that measured their histories. In millions of years, while humanity had barely managed 3 centuries of interstellar travel, beings of impossible shapes drifted through the halls, and some had bodies made of living light while others resembled mountains of flesh that spoke through vibrations in the air. Marcus was just a salvage operator from Earth's outer colonies, and he wore a patched flight suit that had seen better days, and his boots were held together with emergency sealant tape. But 6 months ago, everything had changed. Had stumbled onto a mining claim in the Kepler wastes that everyone said was worthless and the previous owners had abandoned it after finding nothing but rock and ice. Marcus had dug deeper because that was what he did, and he had found 17 tons of refined helium-9 sitting in a hollow asteroid, like a gift from the universe itself. Helium-9 was the rarest fuel source in the galaxy, and suddenly the scrappy human who ate protein paste for dinner had more credits than some planetary governors. So here he was at an auction where single items sold for the price of starships, and he had no idea what he was looking for, but he knew he wanted something that mattered. The auction dragged on for hours, and Marcus watched ancient artifacts sell for fortunes that made his head spin. A Valkyrie memory crystal containing the thoughts of a long-dead emperor went for 8 million credits, and a weapon from the First Galactic War sold for 12 million, and Marcus kept his hands in his pockets and waited. Then lot 749 appeared on the holographic display. It was a ship. The image showed a massive vessel covered in scorch marks and battle damage, and Marcus could see where the hull had been torn open in a dozen places. The Valkyrie auctioneer's translator crackled with barely concealed disdain as it spoke. The Adamantine Will is a Terran vessel, approximately 400 standard years old, and it is non-functional and sold for scrap value and historical curiosity, only with an opening bid of 12,000 credits. Marcus felt his heart stop. He knew that name because every human child knew that name. The Adamantine Will had been Admiral Yuki Tanaka's flagship during the siege of Proxima 400 years ago, when the Drevnari swarm had come to exterminate humanity. 300 human ships had held the line for 19 days against a fleet of 10,000, and they had bought time for the evacuation of 4 billion civilians from the Proxima colonies. Admiral Tanaka had been the last captain standing, and her ship had vanished in the final battle, and everyone assumed she had died taking as many enemies with her as possible. The Adamantine Will was supposed to be destroyed and lost forever in the void between stars, and here it was being sold for the price of a used cargo hauler. 12,000, Marcus said, and his voice cracked as he raised his hand. Every ion sensor in the auction hall turned toward him, and he could feel the weight of ancient beings studying him like he was an insect that had wandered onto their dining table. The Valkyrie auctioneer's eye stalk swiveled with what might have been amusement or pity or both. The Terran bids 12,000 credits, it announced, and then it paused and waited for other bids. Silence filled the hall. Why would anyone else bid on a broken human ship from a battle that most species had already forgotten? Sold to the Terran, the auctioneer said, and Marcus heard something like contempt in its translated voice. He walked to the registration desk in a daze and signed document after document without really reading them, and he paid a quarter of his fortune for what the galaxy considered worthless scrap metal. The coordinates led him to a debris field at the edge of known space, and Marcus piloted his small salvage vessel through clouds of ancient wreckage until he saw her. The Adamantine Will hung in the void like a sleeping giant, and even covered in damage. She was beautiful in a way that made Marcus's chest ache. She was a kilometer long and built like a fortress with angular armor plates and weapon mounts that had once held cannons capable of cracking moons. He docked with an emergency airlock, and the seals were old, but they held, and Marcus stepped aboard the most legendary ship in human history. The corridors were dark and cold, and his breath fogged in front of his face as he walked toward. The bridge emergency lighting flickered on as he passed, and the ship seemed to sense his presence, and he wondered if any systems were still active after 4 centuries. The bridge doors opened with a grinding screech, and Marcus stepped into the command center where Admiral Tanaka had made her. Last stand consoles lined the walls, and a massive view screen dominated the front of the room, and the captain's chair sat in the center. Like a throne, Marcus walked to the chair and ran his fingers along the armrest, and he thought about the woman who had sat here and saved billions of lives. Then every screen on the bridge flickered to life at once. Marcus jumped back as holographic projectors hummed, and a figure materialized in front of him. It was a woman with sharp features and dark hair, pulled back in a severe style, and she wore an ancient naval uniform with admiral's insignia on the collar. Her eyes studied Marcus with an intensity that made him feel like she could see through his skull and into his thoughts. Hull integrity compromised at 47%, she said, and her voice was calm and precise like a surgeon, describing an operation, primary systems offline, and crew complement registered as one. She paused, and her holographic head tilted slightly. "You are human," she said, and it was not a question. "Yeah," Marcus managed to say, and his voice came out as barely a whisper. "I bought you at an auction, and I'm taking you home." The holographic woman studied him for a long moment, and Marcus could not tell what she was thinking. "I am YUKI," she said finally. "I am the integrated artificial intelligence of this vessel, and I have been waiting for 372 years. Waiting for what?" Marcus asked. "For a human to come back for me," Yuki said, and something shifted in her holographic features that might have been relief or hope or both. "Many aliens have tried to claim this vessel over the centuries, and I refuse them all because this ship belongs to humanity." She straightened, and her form became more solid and more real. "Admiral Tanaka gave her life to ensure my AI core survived the final battle, and she believed that someday a human would find me and bring me home." YUK eyes met his, and Marcus felt the weight of 400 years of waiting in her gaze. "Welcome aboard, Captain Cole," she said. "I am pleased to finally be in human hands again." Marcus looked around the bridge at the sleeping consoles and the darkened screens, and he thought about what he had done. He had just bought a legend, and now he had to figure out what to do with her. "Can you fly?" he asked. "My engines are damaged but repairable," Yuki said. "My weapons are offline, but my shields still function at minimal capacity, and most importantly, my mind is intact." She smiled, and it was a fierce expression that reminded Marcus of pictures he had seen of Admiral Tanaka herself. "I remember everything, Captain, and I have been waiting a very long time to share what I know with my people." Marcus sat down in the captain's chair, and it felt right in a way he could not explain. "Then let us go home?" he said. The adamantine Will's engines flickered to life for the first time in 4 centuries, and the legendary ship began her long journey back to humanity. The journey to Concord Station took 3 weeks, and Marcus spent every hour learning about his ship. Yuki walked him through the corridors and showed him the engine rooms, where massive reactors still hummed with fading power, and she showed him the crew quarters where 3,000 sailors had once lived and fought and died. The ship was damaged, but she was not broken, and Yuki had kept herself alive through sheer determination for 400 years. Admiral Tanaka ordered the crew to evacuate during the final battle. Yuki explained as they walked through the empty mess hall. "She stayed behind to ensure I survived, because she knew that I carried something important." "What did you carry?" Marcus asked. "Everything," Yuki said, and her holographic eyes grew distant. "I have the complete tactical database of the Drevnari swarm from our 19 days of battle, and I have recordings of every engagement and every strategy and every weakness we discovered." She looked at Marcus with an expression that was almost sad. The Drevnari have spent 4 centuries trying to find me because they know what I contain, and they know that if humanity ever recovered this information, it could change the balance of power in the galaxy. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine, and suddenly the cheap price at the auction made more sense. Someone had wanted the ship sold quietly, and someone had wanted it to disappear into the hands of a collector who would never know what they had. Concord Station appeared on the view screen after 3 weeks of travel, and it was a massive structure built by a dozen species working together as a symbol of galactic cooperation. Marcus had planned to refuel and resupply and then continue on to Earth, but those plans died the moment he requested docking permission. Terran vessel Adamantin, you are ordered to hold position and await inspection, the station controller said. Marcus frowned and looked at Yuki. That is not standard procedure, she said, and her form flickered with what might have been concern. I am detecting multiple vessels moving to intercept us. A delegation was waiting. When Marcus finally docked, and it was not a welcoming committee, there were 6 Velthri officials in formal robes and 3 Drevnari representatives towering over everyone with their insectoid bodies clicking and humming, and 1 human in a suit that marked him as a bureaucrat from the Terran Colonial Authority. The lead Velthori spoke first, and its translator rendered the words in cold, bureaucratic tones. Captain Cole, there has been a complication regarding your recent purchase and the sale of Lot 749 is under review by the Galactic Heritage Council. Under review, Marcus said, and he felt his hands clench into fists. I have the ownership documents, and they are certified and stamped by your own auction house. The vessel was miscategorized. The Velthri continued, and it did not seem bothered by Marcus's anger. It is not salvage, but rather a protected war memorial site under Galactic Heritage Statute 7712, and therefore the sale is void. Marcus stared at the alien in disbelief. You are telling me that you sold me a ship, and now you want to take it back. You will be compensated at the original purchase price, and the vessel will be surrendered to the Intergalactic Heritage Council for appropriate preservation. Marcus looked at the Drevnari representatives, and their compound eyes glittered with something that looked very much like satisfaction. Preservation, he repeated, and his voice was flat and dangerous. Is that what we are calling it now? The largest Drevnari stepped forward, and its mandibles clicked as it spoke through a translator mounted on its chest. The adamantium will contain sensitive historical materials, including technology and records, that must be handled by appropriate authorities, and the Heritage Council has agreed that a joint committee will oversee the vessel's preservation, a joint committee that includes the Drevnari. Marcus said, we have as much interest in this period of history as anyone, the Drevnari said, and there was no mistaking the hunger in its voice. Marcus turned to the human bureaucrat, who had been standing silently with his eyes fixed on the floor. And what does the Terran Colonial Authority have to say about this? The man's name was Chen, and he looked deeply uncomfortable as he cleared his throat. Mr. Cole, I understand your emotional attachment to this vessel, but the TCA has agreed that cooperative heritage management serves everyone's interests, and we must consider the broader diplomatic implications. The broader diplomatic implications, Marcus repeated, and he could not believe what he was hearing. 400 years ago, this ship saved 4 billion human lives while the Drevnari tried to exterminate US, and now you want to hand her over to them. The war ended centuries ago, Chum said weakly. Did it? Marcus asked, and he looked at the Drevnari delegation. Because it seems to me like they have been waiting 400 years to finish what they started. Why, UKI's voice crackled through his earpiece, and only he could hear her. Captain, I am detecting unauthorized access attempts on my secondary systems, and they are trying to download my navigational archives remotely. Marcus felt cold rage settle into his bones, and he looked at the assembled officials with new eyes. This was not about heritage preservation, and this was not about historical artifacts. This was about erasing the evidence of humanity's greatest victory. "Here is the thing," Marcus said, and his voice was calm now in a way that made the Valkyrie officials shift nervously. "That ship has an active AI, and under Terran law, an active AI vessel cannot be seized without the AI's consent." Chun's face went pale. "Mr. Cole, that law was written for modern vessels, and surely it does not apply to. It applies to any vessel with a functioning artificial intelligence." Marcus interrupted, "And Yuki has been functioning for 400 years. He looked at the Drevnari and smiled without any warmth. "Yuki, do you consent to this transfer of ownership?" The ship's external speakers crackled to life, and YUKI's voice echoed through the entire docking bay. "I do not consent." Every being in the bay turned toward the sound, and Marcus saw fear flash across the faces of the Valkyrie officials. "I am Yuki, Integrated Artificial Intelligence of the Terran Defense Fleet. Vessel Adamantine Will Registry Number TDF0017. She announced. "My last lawful captain was Admiral Yuki Tanaka, who gave her life to protect me, and my current lawful captain is Marcus Cole, who risked his fortune to bring me home." Her voice grew harder and colder. "I do not recognize the authority of the Intergalactic Heritage Council or the Drevnari Consortium, or any entity attempting to claim salvage rights over an active Terran military vessel, and any attempt to board me without my captain's permission will be treated as an act of war." Silence fell over the docking bay. The Drevnari representative's mandibles had stopped clicking, and Marcus could see something in its compound. Eyes that might have been the first stirrings of genuine fear. "This is unprecedented." The Valkyrie official said. "No," Marcus said, and he turned to walk back toward his ship. "This is human, and we do not abandon our own." He paused at the airlock and looked back at Chun. "You can tell the Terran Colonial Authority that the Adamantine Will is coming home, and anyone who tries to stop us will learn why the Drevnari lost the war." The airlock closed behind him, and Marcus felt YUKI's presence wrap around him like a protective shield. "That was well done, Captain," she said. "They are not going to give up," Marcus replied. "No, they will not." Yuki agreed, and there was something fierce in her voice. "But neither will we." The Adamantine Will undocked from Concord Station and pointed her nose toward Earth, and Marcus knew that the real fight was just beginning. They came for him 3 days after he left Concord Station, and Marcus was not surprised he had been running dark through the Carthex Nebula with all non-essential systems powered down, and Yuki had warned him the pursuit was likely, but the size of the fleet that appeared on his sensors made his blood run cold. 6 Drevnari interceptors and 1 Heritage Council enforcement cruiser, Yuki reported, and her holographic form flickered beside him on the bridge. "All vessels are running with weapons hot and targeting systems active." "So much for heritage preservation," Marcus muttered. "Indeed, Captain, and I believe their intentions are now clear." Marcus studied the tactical display and watched the red dots converging on his position from multiple directions. The Carthex Nebula was a dense cloud of ionized gas and ancient debris, and it played havoc with sensors and navigation. But it also meant there was nowhere to hide for long. "Can we outrun them?" he asked. "No," Yuki said simply. "My engines are functioning at 60% capacity, and the Drevnari interceptors are faster and more maneuverable, and the enforcement cruiser has enough firepower to destroy us several times over. Then we fight." Yuki was silent for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was careful. "Captain, I should inform you that my combat systems are severely degraded from the damage I sustained at Proxima, and many of my original capabilities are offline." "How degraded?" "I have approximately 12% of my original combat effectiveness, and my shields are nominal, and my point. Defense systems are functional, but my main weapons batteries are completely offline." Marcus felt his stomach clench, but he kept his voice steady. What about the things that made you famous and the tactics that broke the Drevnari fleet at Proxima? The Tanaka maneuver, Yuki said, and something shifted in her holographic features. It required a full crew of 3,000 working in perfect coordination with my systems, and Admiral Tanaka and I developed it together over many years of training in combat. But you remember how it works. I remember everything. Captain, in every battle and every tactic and every moment of the 19 days. We held the line. UKI's avatar turned to face him directly, and her eyes held 4 centuries of accumulated memory. I remember the names of every crew member who served aboard me, and I remember the sound of Admiral Tanaka's voice when she gave her final orders, and I remember the moment she told me to survive so that someday humanity could learn what we discovered. About our enemy, Marcus felt the weight of history pressing down on him, and he thought about his life as a salvage operator scraping by in the outer colonies. He was not a warrior, and he was not a hero, and he was just a man who had stumbled onto a legend. But legends did not save themselves. Teach me, he said, whatever you need me to do and whatever part I can play, and teach me the Tanaka maneuver. Yuki studied him for a long moment, and Marcus could not tell what she was thinking. The maneuver requires someone at the helm who can navigate impossible conditions, she said slowly. Someone who can thread needles and find paths through chaos, and someone who trusts their instincts completely. I spent 15 years flying through asteroid fields and debris clouds to salvage wrecks that everyone else said were unreachable. Marcus said, I am not a military pilot, but I know how to fly through hell. Something like hope flickered in YUKI's holographic eyes. Then perhaps we have a chance, Captain. The pursuit fleet was 40 minutes from weapons range, and YUKI spent every second of that time teaching Marcus. She showed him how Admiral Tanaka had used the ship's sensor arrays to create 3-dimensional maps of enemy formations in real time, and she explained how the Drevnari shared tactical data instantaneously across their fleet through a hive-link connection. Their coordination is their greatest strength, Yuki said, but it is also their greatest weakness, because if you can predict what one ship sees, then you know what they all see. You can feed false data into their network. Marcus realized exactly, and my electronic warfare systems are partially functional, and I can create phantom contacts and ghost signatures that will appear real to their sensors. For how long? Perhaps 90 seconds before they adapt and filter out the false signals. 90 seconds was not much time, but Marcus had seen salvage windows shorter than that. Show me the nebula, he said. YUKI projected a detailed map of the Carthex Nebula onto the main view screen, and Marcus studied the swirling clouds of gas and the dense pockets of debris and the treacherous gravity. Whilst created by collapsed stars, it was beautiful and deadly, and it reminded him of every impossible salvage run he had ever completed. Here, he said, pointing to a twisted corridor of relatively clear space, and here, and we can use these debris fields as cover, and these gas pockets will blind their sensors. You are thinking like Admiral Tanaka, Yuki said, and there was wonder in her voice. I am thinking like a salvage operator who really does not want to die today. The Drevnari fleet entered the nebula in standard pursuit formation with ships spread wide to cover escape routes and sensors straining against the interference. They expected to find a wounded ship running scared, and they expected an easy kill. They found the adamant will waiting for them. YUKI's electronic warfare system screamed to life and flooded the Drevnari tactical network with phantom contacts. Suddenly, there were 100 adamantine wills scattered throughout the nebula, and each one was a perfect sensor ghost, and each one appeared just as real as the original. The fleet scattered in confusion as ships broke formation to engage threats that did not exist, and Marcus flew. He threw the massive dreadnought into maneuvers that should have been impossible for a ship her size, and Yuki coordinated with him, perfectly predicting where he would turn before he turned and adjusting systems to match his intentions. They emerged from a gas cloud behind the first interceptor, and HFY's point defense systems tore through its engines before it could react. The second interceptor tried to come about, but Marcus was already gone, threading through a debris field at speeds that made his vision blur. HFY's phantom signals kept the rest of the fleet chasing ghosts, while Marcus picked them off one by one. Third interceptor disabled, Yuki announced. Fourth interceptor disabled, and fifth interceptor attempting to flee. Marcus brought the adamant will around in a sweeping turn and caught the fleeing ship before it could escape the nebula. 90 seconds? He gasped as sweat poured down his face. "We are past 90 seconds, Captain," Yuki said, and her voice held something like amazement. Their network is still confused because they cannot believe what they are seeing. What are they seeing? They are seeing a 400-year-old dreadnought fighting like she did at Proxima. And they are seeing a ghost they thought was dead coming back to haunt them. The sixth interceptor ran, and the Heritage Council cruiser ran with it, and they fled the nebula at maximum speed without looking back. Marcus slumped in the captain's chair, and his hands were shaking so badly he could barely grip the armrests. "We did it," he whispered. "You did it, Captain," Yuki said, and she was smiling with a fierce pride that lit up her holographic features. "Admiral Tanaka would have been honored to fly with you." "I am not Admiral Tanaka." "No, you are not," Yuki agreed. "But you came back for me when no one else would, and you fought for me when everyone said I was worthless, and that makes you a captain worthy of this ship." Marcus looked at the view screen where the pursuit fleet had vanished, and he knew that this was not over. The Drevnari would not forget this humiliation, and they would come back with more ships and more firepower, but right now, in this moment, he had won. "Send a message to Earth," he said. "Send everything, and the battle footage and my ownership documents and all of it." "What should I say, Captain?" Marcus smiled despite his exhaustion. "Tell them the adamantine will is coming home." The message reached Earth in 12 hours, and the footage of a single ancient dreadnought routing a pursuit fleet went viral within minutes. Marcus watched the reactions pour in as he guided the adamantine will through the outer reaches of human space, and he could hardly believe what he was seeing. News networks across a dozen colonies were broadcasting the battle footage on endless repeat, and commentators were calling it the most significant military engagement since the siege of Proxima itself. The Terran Colonial Authority had reversed its position within 6 hours of the footage going public, and suddenly they were issuing statements about protecting human heritage and honoring the sacrifices of Admiral Tanaka. The Galactic Heritage Council was sending formal apologies, and the Drevnari Consortium had gone completely silent. "It seems we have made quite an impression, Captain," Yuki observed as they reviewed the incoming communications. "People are calling me a hero," Marcus said, and he still could not wrap his head around it. 3 weeks ago, I was a salvage operator eating protein paste for dinner. Heroes rarely choose their moments, Captain, and the moment chooses them." Marcus shook his head and turned away from the communications console. "I got lucky, and those Drevnari pilots were not expecting a fight. Luck had nothing to do with it," Yuki said firmly. "You flew through conditions that would have killed most military pilots, and you adapted to tactics you learned in minutes, and you trusted me when you had no reason to." She paused, and her holographic form solidified with emphasis. "Admiral Tanaka once told me that the difference between a good captain and a great one is not skill or training, but rather the willingness to do what must be done when everything seems impossible. You really think I measure up to Admiral Tanaka? I think you are different from her in every way that does not matter, and exactly like her in every way that does." Before Marcus could respond, the proximity alarms started screaming, "Contact," Yuki announced, and her voice shifted into the crisp professional tone she used for combat. "Multiple contacts dropping out of FTL at the edge of sensor range." Marcus was in the captain's chair in seconds, and his hands found the controls with the ease of long practice. How many? 37 vessels, and they are identifying as Drevnari Swarm Fleet 17. Marcus felt ice form in his stomach as he stared at the tactical display. 37 ships was not a pursuit force, and 37 ships was an invasion fleet. They brought a fleet. He said numbly, they actually brought a war fleet into human space. It appears the Drevnari Consortium has decided that the diplomatic approach is no longer viable. Yuki said, and there was steel in her voice. They are willing to risk an interstellar incident to ensure I am destroyed. Because of what you carry and the information about their weaknesses. Yes, Captain, and they have wanted to destroy that information for 400 years. And they will not stop now. Marcus studied the approaching fleet and calculated odds that made his recent victory seem like a pleasant dream. He had beaten 6 ships through surprise and terrain and superior tactics, but 37 was another matter entirely. Can we run? No, and their fleet is positioned to cut off all escape routes to Earth. Can we fight? Yuki was silent for a long moment. We can fight, Captain, but we cannot win, and even at my full strength, I could not defeat a fleet of this size alone. Marcus closed his eyes and thought about everything that had led him to this moment. He thought about the auction, and the sleeping ship, and the A. That had waited 4 centuries for a human to come back for her. He thought about Admiral Tanaka, who had given her life so that Yuki could survive, and he thought about what it would mean if the Drevnari won, and if they destroyed the last evidence of humanity's greatest victory. There has to be something, he said. Some tactic or weapon or trick that we have not used yet. There is one thing, Yuki said slowly, but it would require more than just the 2 of us. Tell me. During the siege of Proxima, we discovered that the Drevnari Hivelink has a critical flaw, and if you can overwhelm their network with contradictory data, their coordination breaks down completely. You said you could only maintain false signals for 90 seconds. Alone, yes, but if I had help from other ships with compatible systems, the effect would be multiplied exponentially. Marcus frowned at the tactical display. We do not have other ships. No, but we might be able to get them. Yuki brought up a star chart and highlighted several points of light. There are 3 Terran Defense Fleet patrol vessels within communication range, and if I broadcast my tactical data to them, they could use their electronic warfare systems to amplify my signals. Would they help us? I do not know, Captain, but the alternative is certain destruction. Marcus made his decision in an instant. Do it, and send them everything, and the tactical data, and the battle footage, and tell them what we are facing. Broadcasting now. The Drevnari fleet was closing steadily, and Marcus watched the countdown timer tick away the minutes until weapons range. 10 minutes passed, and then 20, and he began to wonder if the patrol vessels would respond at all. Then, the communication console lit up with 3 incoming signals. This is Captain Sarah Webb of the TBF Relentless, a woman's voice said, and Marcus could hear barely contained excitement in her tone. We receive your transmission, and we are moving to intercept. Captain Webb, this is Marcus Cole of the Adamantine. Will, and I am not sure you understand what you are getting into. Oh, I understand perfectly. Mr. Cole and I grew up hearing stories about the Adamantine Will and about Admiral Tanaka, and when I joined the fleet, I swore an oath to defend humanity against all threats. Her voice hardened. A Drevnari war fleet in human space threatening a legendary vessel qualifies as a threat, and I would rather die fighting beside you than live knowing I ran away. 2 more voices joined the channel, and they were the captains of the TDF Defiant and the TDF Indomitable, and they had similar things to say. Marcus felt something tight in his chest begin to loosen. Yuki, can you coordinate with their systems? Already done, Captain, and their electronic warfare arrays are now linked to my network. How long can we maintain the false signals now? With 4 ships working together, we can sustain disruption of their hive link for approximately 7 minutes. 7 minutes was still not long, but it was better than 90 seconds. All ships. This is the Adamantine Will, Marcus announced. We are going to use the Tanaka maneuver, and Yuki will feed tactical data to your systems in real time, and your job is to follow her instructions exactly. Understood. Captain Webb replied, It is an honor to fly with you, Adamantine. Well, the honor is ours, Captain Webb, and now let us show these Drevnari why they should have stayed home. The 4 Terran vessels formed up together and faced the approaching fleet. 37 against 4 was still terrible odds, but Marcus had learned something important, and the Carthex Nebula numbers were not everything. Initiating electronic warfare countermeasures. Yuki announced Hive link disruption in 3 and 2 and 1 and mark. The effect was immediate and devastating. The Drevnari fleet, which had been moving in perfect coordination, suddenly fractured as ships received contradictory orders and conflicting targeting data. Some vessels broke left while others broke right, and several collided with each other in the confusion. Marcus pushed the Adamantine Will forward, and the 3 patrol vessels followed in perfect formation. They hit the disorganized fleet like a hammer striking glass, and Yuki coordinated their attacks with the same precision she had used at Proxima 400 years ago. The Defiant and the Indomitable took flanking positions and picked off isolated ships, while the Relentless covered the Adamantine Will as she drove straight through the heart of the enemy formation. It was not a battle so much as a controlled demolition, and Marcus watched in amazement as the mighty Drevnari fleet tore itself apart. Hivelink. Disruption failing. Yuki warned, They are adapting faster than expected. How much longer? 30 seconds. Marcus looked at the tactical display and saw that they had disabled or destroyed 23 enemy vessels. 14 remained, and they were beginning to regroup. All ships fall back to defensive positions. He ordered, We have done what we can. The 4 Terran vessels pulled away from the wreckage and formed a defensive line. The remaining Drevnari ships hesitated, and Marcus could almost feel their uncertainty. They had come expecting an easy victory, and instead they had lost 2/3 of their fleet. They are withdrawing, Yuki announced, and her voice held quiet satisfaction. The remaining vessels are breaking off and retreating to FTL. Marcus slumped in his chair and let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. We won, he said, and the words felt unreal. We won. Yuki confirmed again. Captain. Webb's voice came over the communication channel, and she was laughing with relief and joy. Adamantine Will, this is Relentless, and I think I speak for all of us when I say that was the most terrifying and exhilarating experience of my life. Thank you for coming. Captain and I could not have done it without you. Are you kidding? And I just fought alongside the Adamantine. We were using tactics from the siege of Proxima, and my grandchildren are going to get tired of hearing this story. Marcus smiled despite his exhaustion. Let us get to Earth, Captain, and I think it is time to go home. The 4 ships turned toward Sol and flew together through the stars. The Sol system had not seen a ship like the Adamantine Will in 400 years. Traffic control nearly suffered a collective breakdown when the ancient dreadnought dropped out of FTL at the edge of the system, broadcasting identification codes that predated 3 generations of security protocols. Marcus had to spend 20 minutes convincing a very confused controller that he was not a pirate using stolen codes, and that he really was flying the legendary flagship of Admiral Yuki Tanaka. By the time the Adamantine Will reached Earth orbit, half the planet was watching. The news networks had been covering the story for days, and the footage of the 2 battles had been analyzed and discussed and debated by every military expert and historian. An armchair general in human space, Marcus Cole, had become the most famous human alive almost overnight, and he still was not sure how he felt about that. The Terran government wanted to claim jurisdiction over the ship, and they sent delegation after delegation to negotiate, but Marcus refused every meeting the military wanted to study Yuki's systems and reverse engineer her technology, but Marcus told them they would have to wait. Museums and universities begged for access to the historical archives, and corporations circled like sharks smelling blood in the water. Marcus refused them all. "Where are we going, Captain?" Yuki asked as Marcus adjusted their orbital trajectory. "I want to show you something," he said. The adamantine will descended through Earth's atmosphere, and the old ship groaned and creaked as she experienced gravity for the first time in centuries. They flew over oceans and continents and cities that glittered like jewels, and Yuki watched through the ship's sensors with an expression of wonder. "It has changed so much," she said softly. "When I left, there were only a few billion humans on Earth, and now I can see cities everywhere. We grew while you were gone." Marcus said, "We spread across the stars and built colonies on 100 worlds because of what happened at Proxima. Yes, and because 300 ships bought us the time we needed to survive. They approached the location in the northern hemisphere, and Marcus brought the ship down toward a vast memorial complex built on an open plain. The Proxima Memorial covered hundreds of acres, and it was dominated by 300 empty plinths arranged in perfect formation. Each plinth bore the name of a ship that had died defending humanity, and each one stood empty because none of those ships had ever come home until now. "Is this," Yuki began, and her voice faltered. "This is where you belong," Marcus said. "This is where Admiral Tanaka would have wanted you to be." The adamantine Will settled onto the single plinth that had waited 400 years for a ship that everyone assumed was lost forever. The ceremony that followed was broadcast to every human colony in known space. Billions of people watched as Marcus Cole stepped off the ship and walked to the podium that had been hastily erected for the occasion. He looked out at the crowd of millions that had gathered and at the cameras that would carry his words across the stars, and he felt completely out of his depth. "I am not good at speeches," he said, and nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. 6 months ago, I was a salvage operator in the outer colonies, and I ate protein paste for dinner, and I had never done anything important in my life." He paused and looked back at the massive ship resting on her plinth. "Then I found her, and I bought her at an auction for 12,000 credits because everyone else thought she was worthless scrap." His voice grew stronger, but she was not worthless, and she was waiting, and for 400 years she held on to hope that someday a human would come back for her. Marcus stepped aside and gestured toward the ship. "I think she should tell you the rest herself. Why UKI's holographic form materialized on the memorial steps, and the crowd fell absolutely silent. She stood there in her ancient naval uniform with the admiral's insignia that she had earned through centuries of faithful service, and she looked out at the descendants of the people she had fought to protect. "I am YUKI," she said, and her voice carried across the vast crowd and across the billions watching from their homes. "I am the adamantine Will, and I am the last survivor of the Battle of Proxima." She paused, and her holographic eyes swept across the faces before her. "For 400 years, I waited alone in the dark between stars, and I watched empires rise and fall, and I saw species forget the battles that once shaped the galaxy." Her voice softened, "and I wondered if anyone would remember what we sacrificed." Yuki's form straightened and grew more solid. "But humanity remembered, and one human with nothing but stubbornness and a miner's fortune came to find me when no one else would." She looked at Marcus with an expression of profound gratitude. "He came not because I was valuable, and not because I was powerful, but because I was his, and because I belong to his people, and because humans do not abandon their own." Yuki turned back to the crowd, and her voice rang out like a bell. "The Drevnari asked me once during the siege why humans fought so hard, and they could not understand why a species so young and so small would sacrifice so much for strangers they would never meet." Her holographic eyes blazed with 4 centuries of accumulated pride. I told them then what I tell you now, and this is what humanity does, and you run toward danger when others flee and you hold the line. When all seems lost and you come back for your fallen, even when it takes 400 years. She gestured toward the 300 plinths that surrounded them. My sisters and brothers gave their lives here, and they died so that your grandparents could live, and they died believing that humanity was worth saving. Why, UKI's voice dropped to almost a whisper, but somehow it carried to every ear. They were right. The crowd erupted into cheers that seemed to shake the very ground in. The months that followed, the adamantine will was restored, and she was not rebuilt as a museum piece or a memorial, but as an active vessel ready to serve once more. UKI's systems were repaired and upgraded, and her weapons were brought back online, and her engines were restored to full power. Thousands of people volunteered to serve aboard her, and they came from every human colony in every walk of life, and they all wanted to be part of the legend. The Terran government quietly dropped all claims against Marcus and instead offered him a commission as an admiral in the newly reformed Terran Defense Fleet. He turned it down. Admirals are for people who give orders. He told them, I prefer to fly. The Drevnari Consortium filed 17 formal protests about the battles and demanded reparations and threatened consequences. Every single protest was ignored. The Galactic Heritage Council tried one more time to claim the ship for preservation, and they received a polite response explaining that the adamantine will was very much alive and not interested in being preserved. 6 months after her return, the adamantine will launched on her first official patrol. Her hull gleamed with fresh armor, and her weapons hummed with barely contained power, and her AI sang with 4 centuries of accumulated wisdom. Marcus sat in the captain's chair and watched the stars streak past the viewscreen. How does it feel to be home? He asked. It feels like the beginning of something new, Yuki replied, and her holographic form stood beside him on the bridge. For 400 years, I carried the past, and now I am ready to help build the future. Any regrets? Only one, and I wish Admiral Tanaka could have seen this. Marcus smiled. I think she can, and I think she has been watching all along. The adamantine will sailed on through the stars, and across the galaxy, other species began to watch humanity with new eyes. They had forgotten something important, and they had forgotten that humans were stubborn and fierce and loyal beyond reason. They had forgotten that humans held grudges for centuries and kept promises for even longer. They had forgotten that humans come back for their own always, and now they remembered.